What makes movement accumulate into momentum? Whether it's a character running or flying, none of these automatically create momentum. Momentum only appears when one physical event changes the conditions for the next event, and this is called action chaining.
All good, see?
But first, let's look at the difference between the two main movies I'll be analyzing, which is the 2012 film Chronicle and the 2008 movie Jumper. The difference between these two movies is that in Jumper, the movie removed every option of spatial progression, which is when a character moves from point A to point B. But spatial progression is a tool cinema relies heavily on because it gives a film its map. It defines that distance between point A and B, establishing where characters can move, hide, or escape, which leads to action chaining, and what follows is momentum. But Chronicle does the exact opposite when it comes to spatial progression, because in traditional filmmaking, especially in found footage, the camera and spatial progression is usually bound by human limitations, but as the main character develops his power, the cinematography of the movie becomes an extension of that ability, which unlocks and multiplies the path to spatial progression. Yet both film works because the supernatural abilities alter the relationship between the character and physical consequence. Action movies always fail when they keep adding velocity without changing the viewer's understanding of what that velocity actually means. But another problem with Jumper is that the main character's teleportation also destroys cinema's most useful source of anticipation, which is approach. Tension normally comes from closing distance. So how do you create suspense when distance isn't a factor? Jumper solves this by introducing counter mobility, which is a force preventing the protagonist from using their strongest movement freely. The Paladins uses tethering to create friction between the jumpers and their power. But friction and action chaining are weak when they are anchored to high speed. And to understand why speed always fails to build momentum, we have to look at the mechanics of a speedster sequence, specifically the failure of the Flash in the 2023 movie. The Flash fails mainly because of synchronized velocity. If a character moves at 1,000 miles an hour and the camera moves with them, their relative speed on screen is 0. And by constantly freezing the world into slow motion whenever he's running, the film pretty much stops the action chain entirely, because the environment cannot react in real time, which also removes physical consequence. But to actually generate true momentum, the speed must overpower the visual framework of the film through spatial disruption. In speed sequences like Faora in Man of Steel or Makari in Eternals, there's always a short delay after the character exit the frame before the camera can pan. Instead of stopping the action chain and jumping to the consequence, a successful speedster scene compresses it. The movement, impact, and the physical consequence collapse into the exact same fraction of a second. But compression alone cannot sustain an entire film. Maintaining speed across a film requires a different editing mechanic called rhythmic pacing, which adds or gives new narrative meaning to an action. But momentum is also dictated by mass. This is when the subject or object is too big to follow the traditional rules of building momentum. The truck flip scene in Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight shows how mass governs and redirects momentum, which generates suspense as a byproduct. The sequence introduces an 18-wheeler moving at high speed. The camera tracks low and parallel, forcing the audience to register the scale, length, and mass of the vehicle before any disruption occurs. Batman fires his grapnel cables, anchoring them to the street infrastructures. And because the truck possesses massive forward momentum, the cable causes a conflict between the forward velocity and a fixed anchor point. So what follows is the entire weight of the vehicle being forced to pivot vertically over its own nose, executing a full 180-degree flip before crashing. Ordinary CGI simply couldn't replicate that kind of resistance because true kinetic tension requires real physical mass to fight against. The suspense succeeds here because every single stage is bound strictly to the rules of physical mass. While The Dark Knight demonstrates how mass governs momentum through inanimate objects, The Northman proves how the same physical weight operates on a human subject. The film demonstrates this by prioritizing weight over choreography. The impact of every strike relies on blunt force, and of course the consequence for that is fatigue, which acts as the direct link between actions. The momentum is sustained by forcing the character's mass into a forward grind. When a filmmaker respects the laws of physical mass, whether it's an object or subject, action becomes kinetic storytelling. Because if movement doesn't cost anything, then it's obviously empty spectacle.